Welcome to the Friday Transportation Seminar at Portland State University. My name is Leming Wang. I'm co-hosting the seminar with Dr. Kelly Clifton this term. For the first seminar in the spring quarter, we're very pleased to have Kathryn Doherty-Chapman with us. Kathryn is an alumnus from our Masters of Urban and Regional Planning program in 2013, and then she will talk about SFpark for today's seminar. With that, I would just give the room to Kathryn.
Hey, how's it going? It's really funny to be back here. Like Dr. Leming Wang said, that I was just here 2 years ago. I graduated, and in one of Professor Dill's classes, I had to debate against demand-responsive pricing for parking management, which was really hard, actually. But I did it, and it was fun. So right now I work at Metro. I do individualized marketing campaigns and communications. But after I graduated, I went down to San Francisco and worked on the SFpark evaluation. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And yeah, just get started. So actually, who's familiar with SFpark? So some of you, okay, cool. So just to make sure that everybody understands, SFpark is the first demand-responsive pricing parking management scheme done in the world. If you're familiar with Donald Shoup, he has done tons of research on getting to the most efficient use of parking. So if we price the spaces at the right price, we'll get one open space on every block at all times. So the idea of SFpark was to implement those theories and test them. So really the goals of the project were to make it easier to find parking, because when you're driving around looking for parking, you are causing congestion, you're driving more vehicle miles, causing more greenhouse gas emissions. You're also probably distracted and might be running over people trying to cross the street or ride their bike. It also makes it better for public transit if they're not stuck behind a double parked car or someone trying to unload. And also, we were trying to make the neighborhood business districts a little bit more attractive for shoppers and diners, because if you can find a parking space easier, you're more likely to come back and spend more money or take another mode of transportation there. So parking in San Francisco, as you can imagine, is in high demand. There's a lot of people trying to get places, a lot of delivery trucks, a lot of people riding Muni trying to get somewhere. And so SFpark was originally conceived as a congestion mitigation tool. So they got a grant from the US DOT's Urban Partnership Project and went about implementing, here we go, sorry about that. Went about implementing this demand-responsive pricing scheme in 7 different neighborhoods, and we had 2 control neighborhoods. And what's important to note is that these were all neighborhoods that had existing parking meters. So there was no new meters as part of this. And parking was in really high demand. So really, really something needed to be done. So before the city could test this theory and price the spaces at the right price, we had to do some preparations, namely counting all of the parking spaces. You can't manage effectively what you can't measure. So interns, consultants walked around all of the 7 neighborhoods and actually counted all of the available parking spaces, which we then loaded up into our database so that we could manage our assets and figure out how to track the demand. And I'll talk a little bit more about this really great database. Is this on a timer? Okay. So another part of preparing was really trying to figure out how to talk about parking management. It was really important for the city to get this right. And they really focused on the customer service aspect, trying to make it easier to find a parking space, making sure that the public understood that it wasn't just a money grab. There was a lot of people that were concerned that you're just trying to raise revenue. And really, so we spent a lot of money on branding, figuring out how to talk about this. So the tagline we came up with was, circle less, live more. And another thing we did was really try to make it easier to just identify the brand and make it look good, and that's not something that government agencies always do. But the brand management was really, really important to get right. So after we counted all the parking spaces, figured out how to get the look and feel right, we installed smart meters so that we could set the variable prices, different times of day, different blocks, different meters. Also, these new meters accepted credit card, debit card, coin, and pay by phone, so that was really important. Then we installed parking sensors, and a lot of people have a lot of questions about these all the time. But these parking sensors are wireless, and they detect a magnetic change. So every 10 seconds, these meters, you are on a timer. Okay, so every 10 seconds, these sensors sent a signal to a relay machine, which I don't remember the name of, and then that sent a signal to our database. So every 10 seconds, we were getting data into our database on whether or not there was a car occupied in that space. So that way we could track demand and figure out where the demand was highest and how to set the rate. So again, Donald Shoup's whole thing, getting the right price to manage the demand. So every 4 to 6 weeks, we looked at where the demand was, and prices went up 25 cents or down 25 cents. So no drastic change. And it was different times of day. We really found from noon to 3 was the highest demand. And it would vary by block. So this map shows, I'm not supposed to point to that. So this map shows that you could pay 50 cents an hour for a parking space around the corner from a place that you would pay $4 an hour. So the idea was distributing the demand geographically and also by time of day. And then another way that we focused on getting the customer experience, improving the customer experience, and also just to get the information out there was the parking sensor sent a live data feed to an app. And so we developed an app. We also shared the app or the data feed for private app developers. So before you got in your car, you could look on your phone or on your laptop and see where you're going to find a parking space and how much it cost. And this idea was to just make it easier to find a parking space. And there's lots of app developers that use this data feed. So we didn't just do on-street metered spaces. We also focused heavily on our city-owned garages. Same idea, tracking demand, setting the right price. For garages, we were pretty aggressive with an off-peak time discount. So the idea was sort of like a congestion charge, but instead of a charge, it was you were getting a discount if you entered the garage or left the garage at before 8:30 and after 6:30. So using a carrot instead of a stick. Again, we tried to make it easier to find a parking space by low-tech things like signage, better signage, making it just easier to get people off the road and into a parking space. Variable message signs were really helpful, so you could see which garages had how many spaces. So those were throughout the city, especially near the bridges when you were entering. So this was like operations, and so since this was a pilot, we did. Oh, sorry, I'm ahead of myself. So we had to evaluate this for the federal government and for ourselves. So like I said, those sensors were sending us data every 10 seconds. We had these smart meters. We also collected just mountains of data on our own, intercept surveys, parking search time, turnover, tons of stuff. So this is just the architecture of our, this is our IT architecture. So all of these things, roadway sensors, parking sensors, manual car counts, all that stuff going into our custom Oracle database that we bought and they still use. And not just parking, we use this data for all of the city transportation projects. It's been really helpful. That's a good question. An intercept survey is a survey where you go and you literally just stand on the street and ask somebody that you see on the street. You intercept them and say, would you like to answer some questions? So there was, as you can imagine with all that data, some difficulties in figuring out how to process and store. There was a lot of data scrubbing, getting it into the right format, because we wanted to look at time of day, time of year, block level, like side of street level. So there's a lot of data scrubbing that went on. And this was to figure out how to evaluate if the project worked. I am so ahead of myself. We're going to have a lot of time for questions. So like I said, we collected intercept survey data. We collected supply data from the meters, also from the garages. We looked at, did we affect Muni, which is the local bus system, and also BART. So BART and Muni ons and offs. Sales tax data, parking tax data, safety data, which we weren't able to put in our evaluation and that I'm passing around. But we also looked at fuel price, weather, employment, unemployment. We had roadway sensors so we could see if we were, if traffic speeds were going up or down. We actually drove around and counted how long it took to find a parking space. So parking search time was a really, really important metric for this project. Also double parking, since that's one of the things we were trying to change. And also disabled parking placard, because in San Francisco, if you have a disabled parking placard, you don't have to pay the meter. And so there's a lot of people abusing that that program. So, did Donald Shoup's theory of getting the price right work? Well, before we get to that, I want to address the issue of the price, because a lot of people were concerned that this would just be a money grab. Prices went down by average, 11 cents. And that's on street, and then garages even more. So we really aggressively priced the garages lower to get people in there. So some were $6 an hour, some were 25 cents an hour. So it just depended. Did we make it easier to find a parking space based on pricing the meters at the right price? We sure did. So there's 3 different graphs on there. The bottom is the control areas where we did not implement the demand responsive pricing, and the blocks were full, meaning there was no parking spaces, 51% more often in those control areas, and in pilot areas, 16% less often were they totally full, and in blocks where there was a high payment compliance, meaning that more people were paying for the parking that they were occupying most of the time, we found that there were certain neighborhoods that people were more likely to pay for whatever reason, and some neighborhoods where there's people parking there but they weren't paying. And in the areas where people paid more often, SFpark worked even better. So 45% less often were the blocks too full. And we were using a 90 to 100% occupancy rate for too full. So Donald Shoup uses the 85% occupancy golden rule. We were using a target of 60 to 80% occupancy per block face. And in those high payment compliance areas where people were actually paying for the parking they were using, we were hitting our target 100% more often than before. So that's pretty significant. And in the areas where we implemented SFpark, but people weren't necessarily paying, it was only 31% more often, but that's pretty significant. And that's by time of day. I mean, that's pretty great. And then there was a couple pilot areas that were adjacent to our control areas where we didn't implement, and there was a spillover effect. So we actually made it a little bit easier to find parking in those areas that were adjacent. And why do we care about managing parking? Well, we were hoping to get some other benefits. Less vehicle miles traveled, less people circling, being annoyed, fewer people double parking, improving the bus speed, transit speed. managing our transportation system and infrastructure better. Also, people don't like getting parking tickets, so we're hoping to make it easier to avoid parking tickets. And we did that because it was easier to pay, because you could pay by phone, you could pay while you're sitting at dinner, while you're at the movie. You didn't actually have to go to the meter. We reduced citations by 23%, so that actually means that we got 23% less revenue, which is pretty meaningful. And like I said, some of the pilot areas were next to the control areas, so even in those areas we made it easier to avoid citations, 12% fewer in control areas. So like I said, we collected parking search time information, and we found a 43% decrease in the minutes that it took to find a parking space before and after. And that also resulted in a 13% decrease in the control areas, which is pretty significant if you think about all the time you spend driving around looking for a parking space. So we definitely met our tagline of circling less and living more. And driving around less, taking less time to find a parking space, means fewer vehicle miles traveled. So in all the pilot areas, there was a 30% decrease in vehicle miles traveled. And in control areas, a 6% decrease. So, and that means less greenhouse gas emissions. So before, 7 metric tons of daily greenhouse gas emissions in San Francisco, down to 4.9, and that's just in the pilot areas. And also that, slight decrease in the control. We also saw a decrease in double parking, 22% decrease in pilot areas. Hoping to get more, but that's pretty respectable. And that resulted in a marginal increase in the bus speed, the Muni speed, so 2.3% increase in the speed of Muni on corridors that didn't have as much double parking as a result of SFpark. That might not seem like a lot, but any second that you can make transit a little bit more reliable is huge. So this is pretty important. And when SFpark style pricing is expanded throughout the city, I think it will see a lot more increased speed in transit and reliability. So another one of the goals was parking isn't just, we don't want to manage parking just to manage parking. We want to make it easier for our neighborhood businesses to do well. So we collected sales tax receipts data, and we saw a 22% increase in sales tax receipts in those areas. Now, the city was growing a lot during this time, so we can't attribute all of that to making it easier to find parking, but at the very least, we didn't hurt these neighborhood business districts. And most businesses were really pleased with SFpark in general. So, yay us. So the main part of SFpark was really testing the demand responsive pricing on street and in garages. And then we did some other projects. We researched what would happen if we made people pay for the meter on Sundays. We also said through these neighborhoods that are parking is just too hard to find, what if we add some meters here and there? So in those studies, we found that adding new meters is the most effective in getting parking availability, getting it there to getting our targets. We also saw that paying on Sundays helps us get to managing parking more effectively. And then in the neighborhoods that people actually paid for parking, 20% more, 20% of the time, 20% more often parking was available. So this just shows the effectiveness. I'm not supposed to point to this. This just shows the effectiveness of the different projects. So certainly pricing, parking is very effective. Sunday metering is even more effective. And then adding meters where just the demand is insanely high is even more effective. And Yeah, so that is the evaluation of SFpark, and what's next is they're going to roll this out citywide, so they're going to make all of the meters smart meters. They're going to all have pay by phone, and they're all going to have demand responsive pricing. So some neighborhoods pricing will go down to 25 cents an hour. Some neighborhoods it'll be $6 an hour. They're also going to expand this to all of their city garages. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years. And this is a huge project that took a lot of really dedicated, smart people figuring out some of these political challenges and technical challenges. Like I said at the beginning, we spent a lot of time and money on getting the messaging right and the branding right so people could figure out what was going on. Parking can often be really confusing. We were trying to simplify the parking experience. One thing I forgot to mention was we dropped the time limits. So instead of having a 2-hour time limit, a 1-hour time limit, we just said we're going to price parking the right price, and people will, if they want to park all day there, they'll pay, and that'll work. We also had to buy a really, really robust database and figure out how to use it effectively so that our analysts could get the data in the format that they needed. So it was a really, really IT-intensive project, and that took a lot of time and a lot of money. And also, this was a big culture shift in the city and how they managed parking, how they talked about it, how they worked with different departments in the agency. There was some people that were afraid that their jobs were going to get taken away, but that definitely did not happen. We made it easier for them to do their job. And I am way faster than I thought. I apologize. So we'll have a lot of time for questions. If you want to, this is another thing. We collected so much data, more than we could really evaluate in our evaluation. So we share data with anyone that wants it. So if you want to do research, if you just are curious, you can contact Steph Nelson at the SFMTA, and you can ask for there's just so much, I can't even begin to tell you how much data there is. So it's a really good idea for a thesis or just a research project. Just want to make sure you get that. So that is actually my presentation. I have to tell you, presenting in front of my old professors makes me really nervous. So that's true, you're not. So, but yeah, I would love to answer your questions and have a discussion, so we have a lot of time.
For those of you who just took class, before I ask questions, could you please announce your name?
Okay, so a bunch of people shot up. I think I saw you first.
What was the growth in sales receipts in the control areas versus the test areas? And how much do you think you could estimate to the parking speed?
Sure. So I wish I could get this full screen. It was 15% growth in the control areas. The gray is the control, or the rest of the city, not the control. I don't remember off the top of my head what just the control areas growth was. The city economy was booming between 2011 and 2013. So, I mean, we can't say. We just didn't collect a granular enough data. But in the full evaluation, which is online and I'm passing around, there might be more to your question. And then there was somebody over here. Yeah.
Hi, Andy Gating. Could you talk about the public's reaction to this? Has it been favorable? Have there been detractors?
Of course. The public was really concerned at first in general. Obviously, there were some people that said, yeah, we need to manage parking better. It's really, really difficult to find a parking space. So, yeah, it's great. Once it was implemented and people saw, oh, I can find a 25-cent an hour parking space. I can find a parking space easily. I can look at this app on my phone. They loved it. But there was a lot of people that were just really upset. There was actually like a website dedicated to just disparaging one of my colleagues. So it was, yeah, I mean, you're always, anytime you do something really innovative, anytime you really change something, you're going to get people riled up. But the businesses, especially after they saw it implemented, were really pleased. So, yeah.
You mentioned that there was a grant, but I missed kind of the details about the grant, and is that something that like other places can apply for?
I might have to defer to Professor Dill or somebody. It's an urban partnership grant through the US DOT, and I don't know if they're still doing that program. They got the money in 2008, so yeah. But it's a federal demonstration project.
Okay. I have another question, but I mean, I thought it, yeah, I would have assumed it was through the variable pricing program, but maybe not.
Not back then, no.
Okay.
It was about $20 million.
Yep.
Yeah, it was huge. I guess two questions. My original question was, and by the way, very nice job. So.
Oh, thanks. Was it better than my debate?
I honestly don't remember.
I wouldn't expect that you would.
You made a distinction between the areas that there was high compliance in terms of pain and areas that didn't have high compliance. And you may or may not know this, but because you also mentioned that handicap placards don't have to pay. So those areas that had low compliance, was it just because there were scofflaws, or was there a lot of handicap parking?
Yeah. So we did look at that, and it's in the full evaluation. And some areas it was because there was a lot of disabled placards, and then in some areas it was just people weren't paying.
And then my second follow-up, that you may have left before, I don't know. I thought I heard something about the batteries or something on the sensors. And so does the app still happen? Like, is there still real-time data for the public?
So there is not. The sensors were new when we got them in 2010. It was a new technology, so they were only built or installed to last about 3 years. So yeah, last in 2013, or maybe it was right around 2014. Yeah, it was right around the new year. We turned the sensors off because the batteries were dying. So there's no real-time data feed for availability, but there is for the price. So you can still look at the app and see where how much it costs, where you're going. Figuring out how to use meter payment data as a proxy for availability. I don't know that anyone has gotten there yet. One thing I totally forgot to mention in my presentation was now that the sensors are turned off, we're using meter payment data as a proxy for occupancy to track demand and set the rates. So now San Francisco does not use the sensors data, they use the meter payment data, and they developed a model using the historic occupancy sensor data to calibrate that. And other cities are using payment data to track demand, to do demand responsive pricing as well, like Seattle and some other places. And then you had a question, Ian.
Yeah, Ian Studi. My question was about the actual pricing, and particularly on-street and off-street. You had a slide that showed variability by time of day for price. Is it assumed that once someone parks and commits to parking, that the rate is set, or if they move into one of these other time frames, does their rate that they're paying? Well, say I extended it.
Okay, so if you show up at 11 a.m. and you pay $2.50 for that hour, at noon and you park till noon to 3, you're going to pay $3.50. So.
But I guess what I'm getting at is those are sort of set tiers of pricing. But all of a sudden, like if I stay there longer and it suddenly becomes much more busy.
Oh, I see.
Does my rate go up, or do I get in at the rate that I?
So it only changes every 4 to 6 weeks. It doesn't change. Yeah, every 4 to 6 weeks. So, and it only by 25 cents up or down. Yeah. So it's not going to just suddenly switch on you.
So if you park
Well, you would get a ticket.
Like, I'll just keep thinking about it, yeah. Okay.
And then you had, did that answer your question? And then you had your hand up.
To kind of follow up on that, like, what about for the garages? If you got in, so like the early bird thing you were saying, or the late, that's just like the flat. Can the price change at that point, or?
So if you entered at noon and you stayed until midnight, you would pay $4 an hour between noon and 3, so that would be 12, and then $1 an hour after that. And then the discount if you leave after 6:30 is taken off your total. So it actually, so the idea is it looks like a discount, so it looks like a carrot instead of a congestion fee, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, I don't remember who had their hand up. Maybe Brian?
Do you feel from looking at the data that the pricing scheme was dynamic enough and had a high enough resolution to reach the true market rate for the parking space because of the 3-hour periods and also the 4 to 6 week lag and the 25 cent? Is there any plans of making it more dynamic?
Not that I'm aware of. I just was on the phone with the SFMTA and asking them what was next, and they, people don't necessarily want to have their prices jump up and down that much. So, it took some time to get to that $6 an hour. We also were legally obligated to find the lowest price that would manage the demand. But I don't think that it was. I think that it worked. Things take time. People figure out how the new scheme works and adjust accordingly. So I think, to answer your question, it was effective. It was granular enough, and I don't think we needed to jump it up. And was it you? Okay.
Sure. Yeah, Kevin, right? This is probably super basic, but will you explain how the price is before the project and then after the project?
Yeah, good question. So, like most cities, it was a flat rate per hour for the meters. Downtown, they were more expensive. I think they were $3.50 an hour. I used to have all of these things memorized. It's in the full evaluation, but they're around $3.50 an hour downtown, and in the neighborhoods, $2.50 an hour. So some neighborhoods, some areas, some streets went down from $3.50 to 25 cents an hour, and some went up from $2 to $6 an hour. But that was over the time. So it wasn't all of a sudden. Yeah.
You mentioned Donald Shoup recommends shooting for an 85% occupancy rate, but SFpark tried their goal was between 60 and 80%. And I'm wondering why that was so low, because 60% sounds really low. That means 40% of the spaces are open.
Yeah, that was sort of our performance measure to evaluate over the time of day. So you're right, 60% would be too low. So but that was just, we had to pick a target that was reasonable. So 60 to 80% over the course of the day was our target that we used to evaluate. Does that answer your question? And then there was somebody else. Okay.
Lori, okay. I'm basic, congestion pricing, there's a lot of equity concerns. And so I'm wondering, so I'm thinking about Chinatown right now. I'm thinking about Chinatown and how there's really high demand there, and it's in downtown, but it tends to be people of lower income and probably older, so don't really know how to use smartphones. So in the direction that San Francisco is going with all the IT people and all the getting more and more wealthy, I'm wondering if the MTA considered all the equity concerns that can go along with this, with raising prices in areas.
Sure. So yeah, of course, equity is a huge concern. Living in San Francisco it's more expensive than Manhattan right now. So one thing I want to point out is that a lot of the prices went down. On average, the meter prices went down. So that answers that question. Also, making it, so on average down 11 cents on street. And off street also, a lot of them went down, by more aggressively. So the other equity piece is making Muni faster, people that are transit dependent or can't afford a car, making the street safer for people walking, bicycling. I did point out that we lost citation revenue, but because we made it easier to pay for parking, meter revenue went up slightly. So there's more money to go towards Muni or safety improvement projects, that kind of thing. So that's our answer for the equity concerns. But yeah, I mean, you can still use cash to pay for a parking meter. They take bills instead of coins too. Is that satisfactory? Okay.
Just following on that question, were there any areas where there were a significant number of block faces that all underwent a raise in pricing? So you would wind up with perhaps a small neighborhood or a sub-neighborhood that where essentially price did become a factor for anybody that was going to travel.
So downtown prices all went up, significantly. So you would have to walk pretty far to find a 50 cent or 25 cent an hour parking space in the areas right around downtown. But I mean, the goal was to make it easier to find parking, so by pricing it the right price based on demand. So, and you're never going to please everybody. You.
Sean Moriarty. It's actually kind of relating to the last two questions in that San Francisco has a lot of tourism.
Yes.
So how much effort was put into getting people that may not be as familiar? If you're using a smartphone app, it's going to be difficult to get people that don't live in the city to use it to effectively.
So the first point that I want to make about using the smartphone app is that you don't need the smartphone app for this to work. The point is that we priced it based on demand. So we don't need people looking at where to park for it to work. If it's priced right, it'll work. Actually, I got a lot of emails from tourists that really loved the app and loved being able to look on the website to see where parking was and how much it cost. We also made it a lot easier to figure out the regulations. Dropping time limits, that's great. Like especially if you're visiting a new city, you're like, what does this sign mean? I mean, I've been to New York and they're just insane, all the different regulatory signs. So really focused on making the customer experience easier, simpler, just better. And the tourism question, some of the neighborhoods that had the highest payment compliance were actually some of the more touristy neighborhoods like Fisherman's Wharf, and Embarcadero, yeah.
I'm just curious about how, it sounds like this wasn't revenue neutral necessarily, like if you took all the costs of installing the equipment and maintaining the equipment, and then the very slight, it sounds like there was an increase in revenue, at least for the meters, but then decrease in citations. So how are we looking at, the budget for, if this isn't really paying for itself? And what is this replicable for other places?
Right. So the first question, so I'm going to answer the last question. Is this replicable for other places? I would say yes. Most cities have smart meters or installing smart meters, making it easier to track that data and make it easier to set different rates, easier to pay. So you can use payment data to track demand and set the rates. This was a huge grant from the federal government, so not every city can get $20 million. The other thing was the technology at the time was really new. There just weren't a lot of sensor companies making occupancy sensors. Parking meter companies were developing new technologies. There's a lot. So I don't have off the top of my head the numbers, but I know it was like 23% increase in meter revenue. And then I think, and citations went down, I think, by 22%. So yeah, it kind of evened out. 23%. So it basically the same. But I think over time, making it easier for people to pay, more people will pay. And then, did that answer your question?
You said they are expanding.
Yes, throughout the city, yeah.
That means they feel like there is value.
Yes, absolutely.
In this,
because
even though
we're
they're not getting additional revenue.
Right.
But if they expanded to new neighborhoods, maybe that would equate to.
probably would equate to, I don't know if it would affect, I'm not sure. That's a really good question, and I will want to pay attention to see what happens in the next couple of years. But I mean, the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency's main priority is running the transportation system, making it safe, making it run. So congestion, you know, the point of this was to manage congestion. So, yes.
Regarding the application development, or the app development, did SFpark develop one app and just make the data open source, or was it just completely open source and private industry took on that?
So we paid a consultant to develop an app for us, which still exists, and then, yeah, we opened the data feed to anybody.
How many apps came out of it?
I know it's in the full evaluation, which is online, and I'm passing the book around. I think how many good ones? I think probably 3 or 4. Yeah. And then...
I was just wondering, like, if you could touch a little bit more on the fact that you took away the, like, time limit of the parking. I think that's definitely an interesting aspect to it, and I don't have, like, a specific question, but just if you could talk a little bit about how that affected it.
Yeah, so most cities have time limits for parking meters and also just time limits without meters. There were certain neighborhoods where we left a 4-hour time limit just because parking turnover was really important in those areas for those businesses. And then for most of the city, you just dropped the time limits altogether. And it's really, I mean, because this was a pilot project, testing the theory of pricing the parking at the right price to manage the demand. That's kind of, we wanted to make it easier for people to find a parking space, less confusing, and then test the pricing theory. So that's kind of where we did that. And yeah, some people paid all day to park in the meter. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, the point was to make it easier, to make the customer experience easier. Yeah.
Ahmad Zia. How close was the control area to the pilot area? It seems like overall everything kind of decreased. Did it have a impact? Did the control area get impacted by where the pilot area was?
So, okay, sorry, say that last question again.
Did the control area get impacted by where the pilot areas were?
By where the pilot areas were?
Like proximity-wise?
Yeah, so in we had a control area adjacent to the Fisherman's Wharf neighborhood, just, you know, the next couple blocks over. And that's where we saw a really significant spillover effect, where those blocks, parking was just almost as easy to find a parking space in those areas as it was in Embarcadero or Fisherman's Wharf. So there was a spillover effect. In the other control areas, it was, they weren't right next to the SFpark pilot areas, and parking was much more difficult to find. We can go back if we want, but did that answer your question? Yeah. I heard from you, yeah.
Oh, you want me to ask my question?
Yeah.
Oh, sweet, okay, cool. We go back to that slide that had the prices. Why is there
this one?
Yeah, $4 hour right next to 50 cents?
Because the demand. Because the demand.
Yeah.
Because that's where people wanted to go. People like to park right near their destinations usually. So the demand was highest there, so we just kept bumping up the price. And then around the corner, but maybe it's just people didn't drive down. Yeah.
You can see a price, like if you look at the Embarcadero parallel or perpendicular streets, 450, 375, 275.
And then, exactly.
People are probably, I think it's heading north to the left. So people people turning off, seeing there's no parking, people continuing on, seeing that there's less parking. So it's sequential as far as how much parking is available and why it's more expensive closer to that destination.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't heard from you.
Bianca Villamava. I noticed that you said that parking time surge decreased by 42%, and you said the sensors were turned off in 2013. Is that like when you guys did like data collection, or how did you guys track that?
So the SFpark full pilot was from spring 2011 to spring 2013, and the sensors were turned off December 31st, 2013. So it was after we conducted our pilot and did all of our data collection. And we were hoping to use them as long as we could, but they just weren't reliable. People were expecting to see the app, where is parking available, and the batteries were dying, and the data just wasn't reliable. Yes, Mauricio.
Hey, Mauricio. I'm trying to find information about mode split. Were you able to capture if there was a change in mode split?
Good question.
There seems to be variables and metrics going up and down, and I cannot make up a story.
Yeah. So we didn't specifically collect that data. We did ask it in our intercept survey. So we asked people in the pilot areas, walking down the street, how they got there, what they were doing there, all that stuff. And we didn't get enough data to really say if we were affecting mode, if people were going to, instead of pay $6 an hour, take the bus or ride their bike. But, lots of research on parking management, parking pricing, TDM programs. Hopefully you guys know that pricing parking is a huge incentive to not drive or to carpool, take the bus. So,
But when the price went down.
Right.
And then when traffic speeds went up.
Right.
So those are pointing to more driving.
Right.
When transit speeds went up, that points to more transit.
Right.
Stuff like that. It's hard to figure it out. And
It
then looking through the matrix, the changes were not very big. Traffic speed went up 1 mile per hour. That's not noticeable. So maybe my guess would be that probably didn't change very much, if at all.
The change in what?
It would not change the mode split very much because those are more longer term jobs.
I think it would, exactly.
It's a good question though for Jack.
So I'm sure I'm not the first person to think of this, but it seems like the app might encourage people to look at the app while they're driving.
Right.
Did you guys do anything to prevent that?
It won't work if you're moving.
Wow.
It actually shuts off. So that answers that question. Yeah. Nice shirt, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Justin Sherrill. And so you said the time frame for the price shifts was 4 to 6 weeks just during the pilot program. Is that going to be kept as the program moves on?
They're still changing prices. It's not every 4 to 6 weeks. It's usually a little bit longer.
Oh, really?
But not quite.
Is there not a long-term goal to shrink it that time period, actually, so it can be a little more variable?
I'm not sure. I think the agency found that the 4 to 6 or 4 to 8 weeks seems to work. It is pretty it was pretty labor intensive to go through all that data and figure it out. And now without the sensors, we're just using payment data. I don't work there anymore. But I haven't heard of decreasing the time between rate adjustments. It seems like that worked. So if it's not broke, don't fix it. I haven't heard from you.
Yeah. Are there any plans to replace those sensors?
They're certainly looking at it, looking at the cost, because it was a huge investment. I don't think they know yet. Some cities are using parking occupancy sensors just to push out information about parking availability. Like I know London's doing that, but they don't know yet. So, because, yeah.
With the app, are there plans to have people reserve parking spaces ahead of time? Or
not by the city. No. You probably heard of Monkey Parking that tried to basically sell a parking space in San Francisco, and San Francisco attorney said, no, you can't do that. It's public right of way. Yeah, Susan.
I lived in Chicago and you just put a lawn chair.
Same in Philadelphia, in Boston, yep.
Do you know what other cities are implementing a similar program, if any?
Do you mean demand responsive pricing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Seattle is doing demand responsive pricing. That's the only one I know of for sure.
Are they piloting it in specific areas, or is it going to be a citywide rollout?
I think they're just doing certain neighborhoods right now, and I don't know their plans.
Okay, thank you.
Kelly.
We have a question from the web related to that.
Oh, okay.
How the evaluation of the pilot, how are those results transferable to other places, say Los Angeles or somewhere on the East Coast where there's different geography, different attitudes, different contexts?
Right. Well, people everywhere in America get really riled up when you talk about parking. So, and like Susan said, in Chicago and Boston and Philadelphia, you put your chair in your parking space. I mean, I think SFpark showed that pricing on-street parking and garage parking the right price, you can manage the demand by time of day and by geography. So that is applicable to other places. Of course, the locals' reaction is going to be different. I know Philadelphia recently changed their disabled parking placard regulations, and now they have to pay, and that has really helped increase parking availability, parking turnover. And Portland recently did that starting July 1st here, so now you have to pay even if you have a disabled placard. So, I mean, I think it works to manage parking demand, so of course everyone's going to get upset. And I don't know, do you think that is sufficient?
Yeah,
I mean, I think
we need more research.
There you
do you have
go.
a sense of what the minimum level of demand you need to have before pricing is an effective tool?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a really good question because, yeah, I mean, a lot of places in Portland, there's empty blocks with no parking spaces. I don't have a good sense, but, I mean, if we look at this map, I mean, 25 cents an hour means that there's not a lot of parking demand on that block. So, you know, pricing it lower hopefully gets people there to distribute that demand. I haven't seen a number anywhere of like, I would think if your parking occupants, like if your block faces are more than 90% full most of the time, then you got to start doing something.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if Doherty-Chapman 85% rural could be 75%,
right?
70%,
right?
Still good and effective demand management.
Yes, I think absolutely. We use a 60 to 80% target, so.
I'm thinking the messenger makes a big difference, especially if you're like talking to the businesses.
Yes.
Like it might be more time and cost effective to fly in a deli owner from San Francisco to Portland and talk to their business association and having the city like say, this is good for you guys.
Are you taking notes?
Yeah. Like imagine if like a deli owner from San Francisco all of a sudden opened up shop and became like the head of the business association downtown or on 23rd. All of a sudden, that could make or break it for the city. Like, because if you get a couple business owners together and they're influential, no matter how much it makes sense for them to have on street the paid parking, they're gonna not let it happen if they're strong enough. So how did San Francisco overcome that?
Well, so we only tested this in existing metered areas. So only places that already had meters that had insane parking demand. So that's one way. I mean, and yes, people were concerned at first, but once it proved to be effective in managing parking and they didn't lose customers, people were really, really pleased because it was easier for people to get to their business. It was easier to find a parking space. It's easier to pay. It was easier to stay longer at the restaurant or, you know, wherever. But you're right. The messaging and the messenger is really important with anything related to transportation. So, yeah.
I didn't hear anything about the limitations of your methods. I don't know if the methods that you use are superior to other evaluation techniques, especially when you don't have any counterfactual, situation to be able to see what the treatment areas would have been if they didn't, have the SFpark.
So the question is about the evaluation performance metrics, and I'm not sure.
Right? So if you had used a counterfactual situation where you just looked at the treatment areas and compared them to the control areas, but accounting for the treatment conditions if they have not received the treatment.
Okay. Forgive me. So.
Isn't that, I mean, when you have a treatment and control and before and after, I mean, on some of your slides, that's what you have.
Yeah.
Before and after treatment and control.
Yes.
So you are.
So the control areas, I'm tempted to believe that if the control areas change the policy, because the difference in the impact is between the control and the treatment. So if the control conditions change, the impact will change.
But the controls didn't change.
So
the price didn't change.
The prices didn't change in control areas. The prices in the control areas stayed the same. So if they were $2 an hour, they stayed $2 an hour. And the SFpark Pilot areas where we did the treatment, the prices were variable. So we had 2 control areas that were pretty different from each other, and then 7 pilot areas all over the city that were pretty different neighborhoods. Does that more address your question? Okay.
And just maybe one, if people are even more, I mean, the books that you're passing around online have a lot of information, but there's been a couple journal articles published. People who took your data and did some analysis, and I think the Journal of Planning, Education, and Research and the Journal of the American Planning Association. So if you really want to dig into it more, people have used sort of different analytical techniques to evaluate it and come up with some different, generally positive, but different interpretations.
And Dan
Dan Chapman did one.
Some on the equity issue. So I know you had an equity question. So if you can look up Dan Chapman from, yep. Mm-hmm. Oh, of course.
Was there any impact measured on the effect of off-street parking or privately owned off-street parking that wasn't part of the experiment?
Did we do any research on?
Yeah, was there any collection of data from private to see if parking was flowing from the on-street to off-street?
Mm-hmm. We didn't look at private garages in our pilot for the evaluation, but we did look at our garages to see were the garages
most of the test area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And was there
the 7 pilot areas with both on-street and garages.
Okay, in all areas. And
yes.
Was there a shift from on-street to off-street as a result of the pricing?
In some, yeah. Mm-hmm. In some areas for sure. I mean, the goal was to get people off the street, so that's why we priced those garages lower. But it would be interesting to see what, the private garages or lots, how it affected that. I don't know.
And did they respond by changing pricing?
I think some did. One thing I forgot to mention was during this games, the baseball games near the stadium, we had special event pricing and $7 an hour during games, which we have here in Portland during Timbers games. I don't like sports, so I forget what the names of the teams are. But yeah, so we have that here, and a lot of cities have special event pricing. So it's a good discussion.
Yeah, it was a very good discussion. We're out of time. Let's thank Kathryn for it.